Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Gilligan. I'm the Dean of the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas. And we're here today to present the most recent results of the University of Texas Energy Poll. Just by way of background, energy, of course, is an important topic in all households and economic activity within the United States and beyond. We conceived of the UT Energy Poll about 2 years ago to be a periodic measure of public opinion about energy matters broadly defined: price, availability, public policy, security, etc. Today I want to introduce two of the people who run the poll. Cheryl Kirschenbaum is at the end. She's the director of the UT Energy Poll. And Professor Wayne Hoyer, the chair of our marketing department and academic director of the poll. They're going to brief you on the most recent version of the poll, which is the third semi-annual release of the poll. And we think today's results have some very interesting things to say that pertain to this coming election. So welcome, and Wayne, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dean. Again, thank you all very much for coming. We're going to present some of what we feel are the top-line results of our most recent wave of the poll. We have much more than we can present today, but if there are interesting issues that you would want to pursue further, please contact us and we can pursue those issues as well. One of the nice ways, a lot of people ask me, well, what is this UT Energy Poll? And I think this is a very nice statement that sort of sums up what we're trying to accomplish with the poll. It's an impartial and authoritative source of public perspective on energy to inform and guide discussion, business planning, and policy development. And the first part of that, all parts are important, but in particular the first part is very important because we've tried to be an impartial source in terms of there's no one agenda, there's no one group we're represented, and we have tried to get a variety of different perspectives and input into the poll. A little bit of background about it. The first one was inaugurated back in 2010, or it was first developed in 2010, and our first launch of the questionnaire, we pre-tested a lot through early parts of 2011. The first actual questionnaire came out in October 2011, 1 year ago today. There was another wave in March of 2012, and today what you're going to hear is a summary of the third wave of the poll, which is in October 2012. And as I've mentioned, it's a collaborative effort. We like to say that there's many different eyes have seen this questionnaire and had input into the questions and continue to do so on subsequent waves. But there have been representatives from academic institutions, including Stanford University, Harvard University, Cambridge University, University of Mannheim in Germany, polling companies, non-government organizations, NRDC. Ed Chen is here representing. He's been very helpful putting questions on and helping us with feedback on questions. Energy producers and energy consumers as well. And as I said, today we're going to talk about the third release, which was conducted September 6th through 17th, 2012. There were 2,092 respondents weighted to reflect the U.S. Census demographics, so it's a large sample poll, nationwide sample. And in general, the poll, there's a variety of general topics that we look at every wave. Part of the idea is to longitudinally examine these issues over time to monitor trends. And things such as energy prices and availability, energy concerns, satisfaction with how the government is handling energy issues, consumer behavior and voting preferences, which we'll talk about today. And then we also, each wave, try to talk about some various hot topics. And today, particularly given the timing, our focus is on energy and the election. One of some of the key issues related to the upcoming election, national elections. So those are some of the things we'll talk about. So I'm first going to highlight some more consumer-related issues, and then Cheryl will take over and talk about more about energy-specific and political or election-related issues. First interesting finding is one thing we've been doing, monitoring over the three waves of the poll, is to look at how people feel we're going in terms of our energy policy or how we're doing in terms of energy issues. And this is an interesting trend here. You can see in our first wave of the poll, people were very pessimistic. Only 14% thought we were heading in the right direction in terms of energy issues. And now, after 1 year, that has increased dramatically to 24%. Although I should caution and say probably the best way to interpret this is reduced pessimism because still there are a lot that feel we're heading in the wrong direction, but there is a positive trend that we are starting to head in the right direction. We also find, and it's probably no big surprise, that the price of gasoline is a big concern of a lot of consumers. And we also ask, do you expect that 6 months from today the price for gasoline will increase? And you can see there was a if you look at a year ago, it's pretty consistent from about the upper 70s, a little bit higher when we did it in March, but I think that was anticipating the upcoming summer months where typically the price of gasoline does increase. So it's pretty constant that people do feel that the price of gasoline is going to increase. Another interesting question we asked is, how likely are you to seek more information about each of the following in the next 6 months? One thing we do find in our poll, and it's a very consistent finding, is that consumers are very interested in energy issues, and it is important to them. Over 2/3 of the sample does feel that energy issues are important and interesting to them. And in particular, what they're most interested in is things that relate more directly to them personally. So, for example, you can see here, and there's even a slight increase, looking at reducing your own energy use is what's most interesting and important to consumers. Relative, as we get farther down the line, local energy issues, national energy issues, and global energy issues, things that they can have less control over. So what they're most interested in is what they can control or what affects their lives directly. And so exploring that a little more, one of the questions we asked on this poll was, do you think the U.S. energy policy will affect your choices for more affordable and clean energy? And you can see here from the March poll, there is an increase from 41% to 47% of consumers who do feel that the current U.S. energy policy will give them more choices for affordable and clean energy. So they do feel there'll be more choices in the future. Interestingly, this does break down by party lines. Those that were most likely to think that there will be more choices were the Democrats, then followed by the Republicans, the Independents, and the Libertarians. But in general, overall, all parties, people do tend to feel that there will be more affordable choices and clean choices in the future. Another question we thought was interesting, we asked people who do they trust to get their energy information. So since they want to find out more about their choices and how they can make better energy choices, who do they trust the most? And obviously, we were the most, we on the poll were very pleased to see that the top level was academic and scientific community, that they were the most trusted for energy issues. Interestingly, at the bottom were the oil and gas companies, where only 16% or 14%, 15% were trusted for a source of energy issue. And then a variety of other groups, environmental groups, electric provider, other government, local government, regional governments were in the middle. But the academic community was seen as being the most trustworthy, and the oil companies and gas companies as the least trustworthy. And again, that varied depending upon political affiliation. Interestingly, I found this surprising, libertarians are the most trusting, followed by the Democrats, and then the independents, and the Republicans being the least trusting of the academic or scientific community. And then if you look at the oil companies, again, the libertarians were the most trusting of the oil companies, followed by the Republicans, and then the Democrats and the independents. We also asked how likely is it you will adopt these different technologies in the next 5 years, because we talked about the fact that this was very important and they wanted more information about how they could affect their own energy use. And what we found is that the highest likelihood of adopting would be in terms of smart meter technology. We did look at a variety of different choices, but these were the top 4 in terms of what consumers are most likely to adopt in the next 5 years. And you can also see there is an upward trend. And this is a yearly trend, by the way. The green bar is September last year, 2011, and the purple bar is this year, September 2012. And you can see that quite a large percentage, or the largest percentage, of consumers are likely to adopt the smart meter technology, followed by the hybrid vehicle, solar panels, and the electric vehicle. And I think what that reflects is that the smart meter technology is probably the easiest to adopt in terms of effort and cost of all these options. A hybrid vehicle is also quite common. You see more and more people adopting a hybrid vehicle. Solar panels, I think people are more uncertain about the viability of that. And electric cars, people are starting to use them, but how widespread it can be yet is the technology, the battery technology in particular, caught up to where it needs to be. So, but these are the choices that they are most likely to adopt. And also in terms of political affiliation, the Democrat consumers were more likely to adopt smart meter technology, slightly higher than those leaning Republican. Another interesting issue we looked at was what benefits do you most associate with renewable energy sources? And probably no surprise at the top was a cleaner environment. That's what people most strongly associate with renewable energy sources. But what was surprising to us was the low percentage for job creation, economic growth, and American innovation. And these are actual benefits of renewable energy sources. But what we see here in our poll is people don't associate it as strongly with these three issues. So perhaps there's some opportunity in this regard to get this message across, in particular because we also find in our poll that of the issues that consumers are most concerned about, job creation and economic growth are two of the highest concerns that consumers have. And so to the extent that consumers associate renewable energy sources with these issues, could be a big positive in getting consumers to adopt these different technologies. Another thing we asked that was interesting is how satisfied you are with the job that each of these is doing to address the energy issues most important to you. And obviously there's a little bit of self-bias here. Number one was themselves, that they thought they were doing the most of anybody. How accurate that is, or that's just a self-perception, is another issue. But again, engineers and scientists were near the top. President Obama was fairly high up in the 31% range, although it should be pointed out there was a second part of the question which asked how dissatisfied are you, and the president got a high dissatisfaction rate as well. So it was very polarized, but in terms of satisfaction levels, it was quite high. What's also interesting is at the very bottom, probably no surprise to anybody, the U.S. Congress got by far the lowest rating and the very highest dissatisfaction rating in terms of what is being done about energy issues. And then lots of other groups, environmental groups, and local governments are somewhere in the middle. We were also interested to look at, well, how knowledgeable are people on energy issues? And we gave them a question to sort of test this a little bit. And we asked them a question. We gave them 5 choices. Which country do you believe is the largest foreign supplier of oil for the United States? And I want to qualify this. We didn't ask all the countries. We gave them these choices. So of these 5 countries, who do they think were the highest suppliers of oil for our country? And these are the rank orderings. That Saudi Arabia was ranked number 1, followed by Iraq, Canada, Venezuela, Mexico, and Russia. And the interesting thing about this is this is not right. These answers are not right. And in fact, the correct answer, which was a surprise to many, is that Canada is actually the largest supplier of our foreign oil, followed by Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Mexico, Russia, and Iraq is actually at the bottom in terms of providing foreign oil. And sort of an explanation of that is we ask people, compared to most people you know, how knowledgeable are you about how energy is produced, delivered, and used? And you can see here, only 33% feel that they are knowledgeable about these issues. 27% say they are not knowledgeable, and the other remaining 40% say neither knowledgeable nor non-knowledgeable. So there's a lot of people that don't know a lot about energy issues, which suggests the opportunity for educating consumers more about some of these key issues. And one final finding I want to show is, interestingly, it varied by gender, where males thought they were more knowledgeable than females. Whether this is truly accurate or not we don't know from the poll. We never ask for directions, right, because we always know where we're going to go. But someone who can comment more on that is probably the most knowledgeable woman I know about energy, Cheryl Kirschenbaum. She's going to talk about some more issues related to the poll. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne, and thank you all so much for coming. I'm delighted to have you here with us this morning. Switching gears a bit to a different topic that's making news quite a bit, climate change. During the second wave of the poll, we asked if people think climate change is occurring, and we saw that 65% of respondents said yes, climate change is. But we saw an opportunity, and even though the poll is normally done on a biannual basis, there's a whole body of literature suggesting that weather has a pretty big influence on people's opinions of climate. And so we decided to run a one-question poll in July at the peak of the heat wave in this country, just to see if we might be able to observe some kind of shift in attitudes. And indeed we did. Between March and July of this year, we saw a 5% increase overall in the percent of respondents who said, yes, they think climate change is occurring. When we asked the question again this September, we didn't quite know what to expect. In some parts of the country, the temperatures are going back down. But we did see, again, a slight increase to 73%. So that's in 6 months, a jump from 65 to 73%. When we're able to break this down into different demographics, which is one of my favorite aspects of the poll, we see even more nuances of how things are changing. And I think a really interesting example of that is we noted that by September, 80% of both African Americans and Hispanics say, yes, climate change is occurring. Now, the beauty of the poll is it will become this really interesting longitudinal data set. So this is something we're particularly focused on following over time. We don't know how things may shift after the winter. Scientists predict that with climate change, we'll be getting hotter, hot weather, drier, dry weather, but also wetter, wet weather. So if we have a particularly stormy winter, we don't know what that means for public opinion on climate, or whether it might reflect that we're reaching some kind of new threshold and shift in public attitudes overall on climate. As I said, though, we can also break down the data into different demographics, and it's an election cycle. So we looked at the way different people affiliated with political parties might feel about these issues. And as expected, Democrats were much higher last March, starting at 84%, jumping just a little bit to 87% in July, and then still at about 85% in this last cycle. But there was a pretty large increase in Republicans who say that they think climate change is occurring. They were at 45% back in March, and that moved all the way to 53% by July, the peak of the heat wave, just a couple points back down near September. Independents seemed to continue to increase, and so we saw two jumps at a 12 percentage point increase between March and July of this year, and then another 7% increase by September. So attitudes do indeed seem to be changing. Another neat thing that we can do is look not just by political party and by race, but by region. And so we were interested in whether people in different parts of the country may feel differently about climate change. And indeed, they do. The biggest change we saw took place in the South. We asked, do you think climate change is occurring? And we saw a change over the course of just a few months from 57% to 70%. That's enormous. And if you're interested in what we mean by the southern region, I've just listed the states on the right side of this chart. And it seems to be balanced around 71% by this September. But it seems to suggest things are changing, and this will be something we're very closely focused on by next spring as well. The follow-up to this that we always get when I present these slides is, did we ask people why it's taking place? And yes, we do. We asked respondents to indicate if they think each of the following might be a contributing factor. And those that considered each of these as either very significant or significant were combined for these totals. As you can see, we didn't suggest that they were mutually exclusive. And the top answer by far was deforestation, which is a bit encouraging, just that it seems like a number of Americans have heard of deforestation and recognize that this may have some kind of impact on the planet. But you do see oil and coal under that. We, of course, included agriculture and natural forces. And natural gas is only at 36%, but natural gas is something that people are hearing more and more about. So it'll be interesting to see how this may shift over time as we hear more about natural gas in the news. We are also very interested in nuclear. It's been a very hot topic, and we simply asked respondents, do you support or oppose the use of nuclear energy? Just over a third say that yes, they do support it. That's not very surprising. But when you look at who is supporting it, that's a bit more thought-provoking, because 37% of people who say yes, climate change is occurring say they support nuclear energy. 60% who say climate change isn't occurring say they support nuclear energy. Now, nuclear energy is touted as a technology that is supposed to be emissions-free, and that's what a lot of new initiatives to get new plants going have been banking on. But that doesn't seem to be the message that is resonating with the audiences that are thinking about nuclear energy. So we'd like to ask this again next time and just see if more folks are focused on this issue and who is making up those who support it. But of course, this is the election. So the rest of this presentation is focused on that. We asked, which presidential candidate do you believe has the best energy platform for the country? Very directly. 37% said Barack Obama, 28% said Mitt Romney, but we still had 35% who at this point are not sure or undecided. So there's a lot of room to move for both candidates. But who are those people? Looking at political parties, the Democrats overwhelmingly supported Barack Obama's energy platform. The Republicans, same percentage actually, supported Mitt Romney's energy platform. Independents were a little more mixed, 27% for Democrats, 23% for Republicans, so not a very significant difference. But then if you look to libertarians, we have 48% supporting Barack Obama's energy platform and just 21% favoring Mitt Romney's. So something seems to be influencing that group. We looked carefully at different characteristics from things like who already owns a smartphone, who already owns a digital camera, trying to parse out what it is about libertarians that make them different in these two groups. We haven't been able to isolate it yet, but it's a very big data set. So we're going to try to figure out how people make decisions. We also asked, would you be more or less likely to vote for a presidential candidate who supports each of the following? We gave them a lot of options, and what we saw was there was a lot of support overall across parties for increasing funding for scientific and university research into new energy technologies, which is encouraging coming from a university setting. Also, a lot of support for expanding natural gas and financial incentives for companies engaged in renewable technologies. Now, what's interesting is there's support for both of those, yet one is often identified as a traditionally conservative issue, and one is often identified as a more liberal issue. And yet, when taken across the board, we see similar support for both. Something that I'm very interested in, and we've been thinking a lot about during this election cycle, is the use of coal. It's been a hot topic. It's something we see in the news quite a bit, and it's become more associated with one party over the other, something Mitt Romney talks a lot about. So just to give you an example of what we can do with the data, we looked at who was saying that they would be more likely to vote for a presidential candidate who wants to decrease the use of coal as an energy source. And you can see that Democrats were a little more likely to vote for someone who wants to do that, 46% compared to just 30% of Republicans. We're also interested in people's level of concern. And not surprisingly, a lot of Americans are very concerned about the cost of gasoline. 92% rank themselves as significantly concerned or concerned about that. Below that, at 84%, is the cost of electricity, and you can see down the list decreasing concern for each topic. But what you'll notice is near the bottom three, as a matter of fact, have to do with our impact on the environment, either through hydraulic fracturing, impact of domestic drilling, or even the production of carbon emissions. So Americans seem to be a little less concerned about what affects the environment and far more concerned about what affects them personally, tugs on their wallet, and is more of a financial concern. Looking at the cost of gasoline, we know that's a big issue this election. We hear a lot about it in campaign speeches. So we wanted to find out, do people really think that the president can do much about the price of gasoline? So we asked them, to what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? The president has the power to manage the cost of gasoline. Less than a third of respondents agreed. Approaching half disagreed, and then nearly just over a quarter actually are either not sure or said neither. With that in mind, it shouldn't be surprising that the next slide, who do you believe is most responsible for the price of gas at the pump, only 9% chose the president. So even though this is a staple of many campaign speeches, I will reduce the cost of gasoline, it seems like most Americans aren't fooled that the president can do much. And yet, when we asked, would you be more likely to vote for a presidential candidate promising to make the cost of gasoline less expensive, 63%, so almost 2/3 said yes, they will be more likely to vote for someone who promises to do that. So what we see is this kind of disconnect between reality and maybe what people would like reality to be. And so just to end, given there is a debate tonight that I think many of us will be watching, we had an opportunity by partnering with Clean Skies Foundation and Politico back in March to ask in a separate poll, in July, we asked in a separate poll, which topic should candidates address in the presidential debates? They were given all of these choices and told that they could rank them. And so what you see here are the combined rankings for the first and second topic people would most like to see discussed during the debates. Overwhelmingly, once again, it's gas prices. So maybe that's something that they will keep in mind tonight. We'll see. But with that, we'd be really interested to hear your feedback and open things up for questions. And thank you again.
Hi, thanks for that presentation. Derek Sands from Platts. You talked about the support for natural gas development and also financial support for renewables as sort of one is associated with more Republican platform, one more Democrat. Were you able to look at sort of the data here and tease out what policies led to the larger support for Obama overall?
At this point, there are a lot of interesting correlations between groups and the responses that we're seeing, but it's really hard to identify what exactly those are. We hope to over time, though. I mean, this is a data set we're planning to build over the course of many, many years.
Anyway, I was really curious about your data about the South. Can you explain further how you account for the change in public opinion about the climate change down there?
Well, again, it's difficult to say anything solid about the changes that we're seeing, but I mean, there has been a lot of media attention to the heat wave. There have been a lot of financial issues that have come up with ranchers needing to sell off cattle, with crops being ruined that are going to affect us in many different ways across the board. And
hurricanes.
yeah, it's getting stormier.
There's a lot of environmental events that have been occurring in the South that have had major impact, and I think that it's got their attention.
I suspect the hurricanes also factor into the September polling, because you kept mentioning the heat wave in July, how is that? But then things often were higher in September, and I would assume that would be a factor, right?
Right. We want to really find out what's tracking together. It could be as simple as the cost of gasoline. It could be the election cycle is bringing more attention to certain issues. So we'll see.
Hi, I'm Dave Michaels from the Dallas Morning News. On slide 36, what do you think poll respondents mean when you ask them the president has the power to manage the cost of gasoline? Do you have a sense of what poll respondents think you mean by manage the cost of gasoline? Are we talking about through energy policy, through something as explicit as price controls? I mean, what do you think that they mean by the power to manage the price of gasoline?
I think they mean that can the president have impact on it? So if they make a promise that I will lower the price of gasoline, that they could actually do that. They don't directly say that, but I think that's what people think that they can do. That, and we'll blame the president when gas prices, when it goes up, oh, it's Obama's fault. That, you know, so I think they think that the president can have a direct impact on what the price of gasoline is.
Yeah, and we had some discussions about that beforehand, and we intentionally left it a bit more ambiguous because we don't know exactly why people would feel like that was true. But during the Republican primaries in particular, that was a big talking point of Michelle Bachmann, and she said she would bring down the cost of gasoline to $2 a gallon, but she never outlined how. And so we just wanted to get a sense of whether people believe those kinds of statements.
Except we did find 42% disagree with that. They thought that the president could not. Yet it's still an important issue in the debates and in the election, which we thought was real interesting.
Talia Buford, Politico. I know that you said that, let me go back up here, that a lot of people believe that, well, 38% believe that Obama had the best energy platform for the country, and that breaks down differently, Dems versus Republicans. How likely do you think that's actually going to translate to the polls? I mean, people may say that, oh, he has the best energy policy, or that Romney has the best energy policy, but do you think they'll actually vote on those beliefs?
Well, I think it depends on who the voter is and where their priorities are focused. So for some people, yes, but certainly not for everyone.
It's just one issue. It's a complicated situation because we also find in our poll the number one issue is jobs. And so they could fully agree with the energy policy, but if it's not an agreement on the job creation, that could tilt it. But it does suggest that at least for those consumers where energy is one of the most important issues, that there is a higher percentage towards the Obama position.
And it also does suggest that certain candidates may benefit by what they emphasize. I mean, one of the more surprising things to me was the fact that people aren't associating job creation with renewables. And yet, since job creation is such a big priority, particularly now with the economic downturn, that might be something to really promote if that's a policy that you support.
Hi, thank you. Lynn Garner with Bloomberg BNA. One of the questions deals with what do they think about the future, and apparently that's not too bright or they're not too enthusiastic. Could you go over those numbers? And I think associated one is the role of government.
Yeah, like I say, but generally in the first poll we did, we found consumers were very pessimistic. That the actual number was that it was only like, I believe, 24%, no, 14% last year felt that we're heading in the right direction, and over 40% thought we're heading in the wrong direction. I think that correlates with the economy to some extent. I think when times are down, high unemployment rate, consumers are relatively pessimistic about a lot of issues, and energy is connected to that. But I think what we're seeing as a trend over the last year, a significant increase or decrease in the pessimism, that people now think we are heading more in the right direction. Economic conditions have improved, not dramatically, but they have improved. So I think that makes people more optimistic, and then we see that reflected in their willingness to adopt renewable energy technologies. I think people are more willing to adopt new technologies and invest in different areas when they're more optimistic about the future. So we see it as a general trend. And this would be a real interesting thing to track over time because, you know, as the economy changes, you would expect major increases in a lot of these different areas.
The level is interesting, though, right? Still 3 out of 4 people think that we're heading in the wrong direction with respect to energy policy.
I wouldn't say it's 3 out of 4. It's more like in the 40%. There's a large group in the middle. So it's about 36% now say we're in the wrong direction.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's 24% in the right direction, about 36% in the right direction, and the rest are kind of in the middle.
Okay, wrong direction, or they don't know.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And in the role of government, it appears that most people think that the government should do more.
Yes, we did ask a question. I didn't report that, but we do have a question. Do they think the government should do more? And the majority of people do think, I believe it's about 40, 50%, but I could get you the exact number, think that the government should do more. There's also a general frustration that I mentioned with Congress, that Congress is not doing enough. An interesting thing we find is that most people are very happy with their representative, their senator or their representative, but collectively, as a group, they're very dissatisfied with what they're getting done. So I'm not sure what the solution is. Everybody wants to vote for their current congressman or their current senator, so there's not that impetus for change, but collectively they just don't, by far Congress was the lowest rated, and that's consistent with the Harris poll and the Gallup polls, so across a variety of different areas there's a lot of dissatisfaction with Congress.
Mike Simon, AAAS Policy Fellow. I'm intrigued by your question 151. If you learned that your neighbor's electricity consumption is lower than yours, how likely would you be to change your consumption behavior? And we see what seems to be a pretty affirmative response to collective behavior. But I'm wondering, did you by chance break that down by regions or political affiliation at all? And I ask because there was a study, and it's a bit older now, I suppose, just based on empirical data, showing that people responded affirmatively in some parts of the country, but in other parts, they actually could be neutral or even respond negatively, using more power when they learned that they were less efficient than their neighbors. Did you happen to break any of that down?
I don't think we did, but we could do that very easily. But I don't think we've done that yet, but that'd be an interesting thing we could do very easily.
Yeah, we have a very, very vast data set at this point, so we're looking for these relationships.
It'd be an interesting little behavioral thing, perhaps. I don't know what you'd get, but...
I mean, and the poll is limited only in that we don't know if we can trust how people self-report. So maybe they say, absolutely, I wouldn't, but if it came down to them getting their own bill, then maybe they would. And there have been, I've seen some of the interesting studies by utility companies doing just that. So.
Yeah.
Well, we did ask two questions. We asked one question about their own behavior, because people do tend to over-self-report that I do more than they actually do. And then we asked them about their neighbors on average. How do their neighbors? And of course, they themselves thought they were more active and doing more things. But we often find in behavioral science research that when you ask them to reflect on others, that's more accurate in terms of what people really are doing. But I should also mention, if there are certain issues you're interested in, we can follow up with your question. It's very easy for us to run these breakdowns, and we'd be more than happy to do that and get you that information.
Interesting.
That's one of the things of the poll. We want to be a useful source of energy information. And so if you have questions of us, please contact us, and we can explore certain issues or go into questions in more detail. And we have a list of all the complete questions. We haven't reported every single question that we've asked, and we're more than happy to follow up with you and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you.
So I have a question. I was startled at the number of people who said they intended to buy a hybrid or an electric car in the future. I don't think they reflect what the auto companies think is going to be purchased in the future. Is that another one of these self-reporting biases?
Yeah, people always say they'll do something, but when it comes right down to it, and particularly the more effort and cost involved in it, it's socially desirable to say, oh yes, I'm going to buy a hybrid vehicle, but when it comes right down to it, when you have to actually shell out the money or actually do it, then we find that actual behavior is lower than reported behavior. And that's a quite common bias in behavioral science research. And so you usually take some of these numbers with a grain of salt because of that. Now, that being said, with the smart technology, that is the least effort and most implementable of those technologies. So I think that's the relative percentage here is relatively interesting, because I think people are more likely to adopt that technology for the reasons we just mentioned.
And that is something we're very interested to break down by region, because there are certainly parts of the country where adopting a hybrid car is kind of becoming ingrained in that culture, where if your neighbors have them and you are living in that community, you would like to own one as well. And there are definitely places where that's not the case.
Cheryl, I don't know if you have information on this or if it's somewhat speculative, but given the correlation you drew, I'm sorry, Bob Deans with the Natural Resource Defense Council. Given the correlation you drew between weather and climate, I'm wondering whether if we have a cold winter, you would anticipate the numbers changing with the weather, if they're that fluid, or if you think the events of this summer left an enduring perception in people's minds that might have crossed some kind of threshold such that belief in climate change is ratcheted up at some point?
Well, that's the big question. I'm really not sure. I know that several years ago there was a blizzard in DC. It was after I moved away from living here. But when the blizzard happened, I'm on a lot of listservs for kind of climate change denial groups too. I don't know why. And as soon as the blizzard happened, I got so many, my inbox was bombarded with, well, we've just proved it all wrong. So I have no doubt that if we have a wetter, stormier winter, there will be a lot of that kind of rhetoric that we're hearing as well. So I would anticipate some kind of dip, but at the same time, the jump was so notable in the past 6 months that we may have reached a new kind of tipping point.
But it's interesting, those are the kinds of things we hope to answer with the poll. By being longitudinal and twice a year, we have 3 data points now, which is starting to get us in the longitudinal area. But over the next few years, when we have multiple data points, we can look at those very issues. Is it a consistent trend, or is it going up and down? And so I think that's one of the real values of this poll, is to look at those kinds of issues.
Yeah,
And we have a number of faculty that are very sophisticated in longitudinal data analysis, and they're just chomping at the bit waiting for the data set to get to the point where they can start really going into these kinds of issues.
On slide 37, where you break down in a pie chart the parties that your respondents think are to blame for the price of gasoline, is that I was kind of struck by the fact that more people blame speculators than blame the president or blame Congress. Given where gas prices are and how the Romney campaign has been using that against Obama, were you surprised that only 9% blame the president? Is that how is that above or below what you thought you might see?
well, we did, I believe that's the question we say who's most responsible. So I think that may account for fewer people maybe choosing that as an option when they can choose oil and gas companies. Personally, I was surprised at the higher percentage that did choose commodity speculators. First, because someone would have to know what a commodity speculator means. I think that there's a lot of ways to talk about that. But yeah, I mean, given that we asked most responsible, I'm not really that surprised.
And it's also, when you look at the other results where they say they would vote for a president that could control it, so it suggests that perhaps they do think more, they put more of the blame than that 9% would indicate.
Mm-hmm. And if anything comes up later, I mean, definitely reach out to us because we have a very rich data set and we'd be happy to tell you about it.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming today.